Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to When Tomorrow Comes. This is iSenior's regular look at the changing world of planning, development, and the built environment. This week, I'm lucky enough to be joined by our Transport Director, Clive Burbridge. Hello, Clive, how are you doing?
Hi, good to see you, Dan.
We've also got a guest speaker in this week, Richard Moffett from Moffett Parking Solutions. How are you doing, Richard?
Good, thanks, Dan. How are you? Hi, Clive as well.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So, as is traditional with these things, we're coming to you from a wet and dark and grim sort of bedroom down in South London at the moment, and cycling is probably the last thing on everyone's mind. But I'm going to hand you over to Clive Burbridge now to give us a bit of a take on his Wednesday email, which you should have received in your inbox a couple of days ago.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Well, the Wednesday email this week was really about cycle parking, so it's quite appropriate. It's wet and dingy and people aren't cycling at the moment, you should say. It's a flavour of the month for me, and it's things I've said before. It's the concern about the lack of cycle parking and the quality of it more than the lack of it, sorry. So particularly in London and the rest, where we've got flats and we've got office developments, I've said before, what's putting people off is COVID's increasing the cycle propensity, but when it comes to parking, people don't want to put their bikes in the garages, in the basement, in great big cages where everyone can get to them and that. And I think it does limit the use of the bike, particularly in office environments and the flats and the rest. And then you see them on the balconies, in people's houses, in the bedrooms and things. And it's about finding the right solution, but also a solution that meets the TfL standards, because the TfL standards now are being very demanding, and rightly so, to require cargo bikes, disability bikes. So they're not the conventional standard bike where you can park them and move on. And I think it is finding that solution and moving that forward so people want to park their bike and want to use their bike.
No, thank you, Clive. So, Richard, what's your take on this? What have you been working on that kind of solve this problem?
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and thanks, guys, for having me on. I suppose to give just a very brief summation of our background. We are an automated engineering company on the go about 2 to 3 years, and our kind of our core, if you like, is in car parking solutions, semi and fully automated solutions, which essentially serve to use vertical optimization to optimize space and create secure parking without using up as much ground footprint. And was really over the course of the earlier part of COVID last year, or the first wave, if you like, where we started to get approaches from a couple of different people who said to us, have you ever looked at the idea of using a similar concept but for bicycle parking? And as Clive mentioned, there's this kind of COVID has increased the drive, both from, I think, government point of view and from a commercial and company point of view, wanting their staff and commuters to not only not use cars and their own personal vehicles from a sort of a green and environmental point of view, but also now there's obviously a move to get off the tube and get off the bus and keep our distance and stay away from public transport. So there's very much a drive with those two things together, I suppose, both in the kind of a shorter term view with COVID, which will hopefully be over in the months and years to come, but also in a much longer term view from an environmental point of view. It's very much a key focus of most governments. And so we were asked, have we looked at, like I mentioned, there's this challenge not only for the capacity to park bicycles, but also for a solution that is secure enough to allow someone, who's invested maybe a few thousand or more on their bike to be comfortable to have somewhere to park it that's both convenient and secure enough for them to feel comfortable leaving it there. And we were approached by a couple of private companies from the like I say, from the commercial and employment world, but also from the both residential and also commercial development world, where the companies are, and architects and developers are looking at developing new buildings and obviously need a provision for certain different things, but that very much is including now, and especially in London and other bigger cities, a requirement for the provision of cycle parking. And they're looking at ways how they can do this, in an innovative way, which is maximizing the space that they have available. And developers are certainly very frustrated by taking up so much space for bicycle parking, not the best, most efficient use of that space, and at the end of it all, maybe not the most secure solution either. And as I've mentioned as well, there are some solutions when we looked into this. There are some solutions out there, right from the simple Sheffield stand, which is just a sort of a hoop that you can put a bike lock on, and you'll see those on streets and so on. Really, the level of security of that depends how eager or what tools anyone who wants to steal the bike has available to them. And then you will also might see the hinging system where you can park one bike on top of another, which is a little bit more innovation, but probably has the same restriction in terms of how secure it actually is. Completely on the other end of the scale then is a couple of Japanese systems that people may have seen, where they have very complex and very smartly engineered fully automated systems where you put your bike almost into like a vending machine, if you can imagine, where it'll be taken away by an individual mechanism and placed, and it might store 40, 50, 100 bikes, all with individual mechanisms to move each of those bikes individually. The idea of that is very good, but what we have found is that can be quite cost prohibitive because of the amount of moving parts and technology within that. So where we kind of landed was probably a hybrid of all of those things, trying to utilize height, if you like, or vertical optimization to try and take away from the ground footprint, because in cities people are, the buildings go up, so why should any other infrastructure not go up? And that's really what we do with the car parking as well. But rather than having a moving part for every individual bike, the system that we have looked at developing, or we are developing, is a system where almost it treats the moving part as per shelf, if you like. So the system might have 3 or 4 shelves high, and each one of those shelves comes down as one moving part, and that might have 6, 8, 10 bicycles attached onto it. So there's a whole range of kind of customization around the functionality and the security and how a system like that might actually work. But if you can imagine it in a residential setting, you might have a system which houses 64 bicycles, let's say, across maybe 4 levels of height. It would be access control with an RFID, a fob, or a card that would give you access to the system, which would be your first level of security. And once in there, you would need that same fob to actually operate the system. But when you brought your level, if you park on level 3, when you bring your bike down to the ground in order to take it out, you will obviously bring down another 8 or 10 or 12 bicycles along with it. So at that point, someone might question, what's the difference in the security? Well, our suggestion is that A, it's probably not your neighbor that's stealing your bike. And B, when that level is brought down, we have it designed that you actually have the same stand that you would have on the side of the street. And that is how the bike is secured there. So you can actually have your own level of a lock again at that point, which is your own kind of personal security. So that's really the point that we're at. We've done we've received a grant to develop this system, and we're really at the point now of talking to various different companies, councils, consultancy firms to, I suppose, get their feedback so that we can accelerate the process of getting to the right product as quickly as we can. With our background in engineering and automation, the actual difficulty of developing the product, or the complexity of the product, really isn't that great. It's something that we're quite comfortable doing. You're obviously not dealing with heavy loads or heavy pieces of infrastructure, and the main thing is that the system is functional and easy to use for a cyclist. The final thing that we are able to do, and maybe it's another look to the future, and we're getting there pretty fast, I think, is the option, because of the mechanical nature of the system, we already have power there, and therefore we can provide charging facility for all bikes within the system as well, and certainly within cities, and certainly as a means of a mode of commuter transport. I think e-bikes are becoming ever more popular as well.
That sounds ingenious. You preempted one of my questions there about how it's going to work with electric bikes. Clive, how do you imagine this sort of thing's going to go down with Transport for London? Are they going to be sort of keen to see new innovative solutions, or are they just going to revert back to type and demand sort of Sheffield stands everywhere?
No, I actually think this will tick all the boxes, to be quite honest, because I mentioned TfL, but of course there's plenty of other councils throughout the whole country, and you know, Scotland, Ireland, and the rest that have similar standards, and it's their standards, and TfL is all about making sure you can accommodate the right variety of bikes and the right percentage of each type. And what I liked about the innovation that NPS are trying to do is, because you're bringing down the platform, when I've been in discussions with them, it means if we want to tailor it, we could put a cargo bike on one and have a bigger gap, or it might be it's a cargo bike platform that only brings down 3 bikes instead of 6 bikes because it can only take 3. And I love the fact that we could tick all the boxes in TfL standards whilst overcoming, which is my concern, and my big concern is the security. I just think the lack of security in these big cages puts a lot of people off. I've got some nice bikes. You've got some nice bikes, I know, as well. And I wouldn't want to put mine in a big cage with everybody else. I want to know it's safe. And I'm pretty sure, without a shadow of doubt, TfL will welcome this, as will many other councils. And of course, if it's space saving, it's good for developers as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Richard, have you tested it with any sort of local authorities, and what's their feedback been to date?
Yeah, so it's actually a process that we're going through. We've received a development, an R&D grant locally here, and we're actually working with. It's actually the original agreement that we had fell through just with COVID and things last year, but we have a new agreement in place now to put a pilot system on a university site here in Ireland. So we try to do that with development with new products. We can obviously develop prototypes in-house, and we obviously do version 1s and version 2s and testing different parts of new systems. And we can develop a full system and put it in the corner of the factory, at the corner of the yard, and fill it up and run it for some testing for a week, and maybe then get it into action when a potential client is coming to see it again. But really, we prefer to put it, if we can at all, there's potential to have a pilot system in a real life situation, give benefit to the user of that, and further benefit to us because it gets a more robust robust testing. So we are planning this year over the coming kind of first half of the year to move forward with the installation of which will be a small scale system, probably 24 bikes, something like that. But it's more about the function and to start kind of get to the point of getting user feedback, what works and what doesn't, and obviously there's the mechanical side of it that no one will ever really know or care about in the background that we have to look after. But really, to the user, it's what meets them. How do they access the system? Do they use an app? Do they use a card? That's the kind of thing that's going to be really important to get right, because ultimately, no one really will be bothered what's behind the curtain as long as that works, and we're very comfortable with that. The more, I suppose, crucial part to get right, and the bit that will take some feedback and user testing to get perfect, will be, like I say, that kind of what faces them in terms of the user journey or the user experience to actually using the system. And the other thing is that as a company and as a wider company group, we've always been very open to customization. We generally have a sort of an 80-20 rule where 80% of a certain range of a product will be the same, and then the 20% will be customized to the needs of that customer. So it's not something that's coming off a mass production line, and if it fits, it fits, and if it works, it works. Then and if it doesn't, then tough luck. It's more a case of we'll work on a sort of a consultancy basis with a company or a client to understand their needs as we go through that design process, and that 20% then would be tweaked, either whether that's in terms of dimensions or function, or even aesthetics, to what they need, and then we have a product that's completely fit for purpose for them. So while we'll be doing some kind of user testing and taking feedback from that, it still doesn't mean that that's a fixed finished product and the only one that there will be. There's always a little bit of flexibility per client.
Okay, interesting. I know we're talking about sort of where situations where developers and people putting up buildings were obliged to install these sorts of installations to come up with to meet sort of various planning standards. But don't we need more innovative solutions, Clive, in and around our sort of transport nodes? Because if you look at kind of big train stations, the amount of bike parking stations, spaces there, there never seems to be enough. I mean, you look at in Amsterdam, they're in the process of building a 12,500 bike multi-level sort of storage facility there. Do we need to actually think less about what we're doing in new development and actually making it easier for multimodal transport journeys through different train stations, through different bus networks, things like that, and actually install more intelligent solutions around transport nodes?
I think we do, and I think that's where there's almost two markets on that, isn't there? There's the product where you take your bicycle or your e-scooter from A to B, so it leaves your home and it ends up at work, and it's portable enough that it can utilise those other modes. Or there's where you go from home to the station, and that's where you leave your bike or whatever, and then you have your interchange onto another mode. And I completely agree. And it's funny you say that. I won't name the project, but just yesterday I was talking to a client about the idea of this bike park that MPS have developed, and they're all for it. They think it's a great idea as part of a interchange at the railway station, where we're building a big housing estate, hopefully, around it, localised shops, move the buses to next to the station, so the buses are there and the taxis are there, and then put something like this bike park in at the same time and create that hub. So it's ironic you just say that, but I was literally just talking yesterday to a client about creating a hub, so we've got that interchange and we've got that flexibility, and then it's a multimodal choice from that point onwards.
Yeah. Brilliant. And then I suppose, Richard, the next sort of step in this journey is really looking at citywide bike hire schemes. We have electric or non-electric bikes just sort of available en masse. So as you say, they're secure. They're not going to get nicked or vandalised or damaged. Presumably, they're weatherproof. I mean, how far can this go?
Yeah, and I think the question you asked there, and Clive's points are, really important. We see that any journey obviously has a minimum two ends and probably some further stops along the way. So the obvious ones of those from a commuter point of view is the workplace or the office, and the residential end. So that's probably where developers are looking, and requirements to put certain numbers of provision of certain numbers of spaces, both in residential and commercial scenes. But then really to make a city work and make a city connected is to bring the councils in and really I suppose increase the prevalence of this parking. A vision that we have for the future of where this can go is that a registration to use one of these systems, where you can develop that you have an app and you have access to hundreds of locations of these parking sites or structures around a city, and that may include your own home or where you live, and it may include work as well, but that a certain membership or a small fee that you pay actually gives you access across a whole connected network. And that's certainly where this can go. And then within that, like you mentioned, there's huge scope, and we've already seen it being very successful in London and other cities, the sort of Boris bike, as we call it, model, where you can pick up I suppose a publicly owned bike, if you like, and a sort of a sharing culture where you leave it back then in another location in a charging point. There's no reason why the systems can't be developed to be, say, 50% bikes for hire and 50% bikes for personal use, but with different levels of kind of membership of a registration, if you like, or membership to an app or to the system to allow you access to whichever parts of that are relevant. So it's certainly, there's the whole mechanical development side of it, and looking after the charging and looking after the capacity and the security. That's one thing, but ultimately this system becomes about a kind of a front end interface, and how that registration can be managed, and is it managing payments in the long term, and are people prepared to pay X amounts? Do councils want to, or governments want to subsidize that? Because one feedback that we have had from the council end of things is that the first challenge they have is providing enough parking for the current demand and the current use of bicycles. But they see it there's a cause and effect. They feel that if they can provide the infrastructure, then they can actually drive up the use of bicycles in the future. So they think that the lack of infrastructure is not only it means that they're unable to have provision for the current demand, but it's actually making people reluctant to go down down the route of using a bicycle because they aren't comfortable with the infrastructure that's there. So there's definitely a feeling from a council or government point of view that there's a bit of chicken and egg, and if they can actually put the infrastructure in place, then people will look at other people and say, well, then I can save money on public transport or sell my car, and I have a very safe way to invest in a decent bike and have a safe place to park it, and I may even be prepared to spend £5 or £10 a week or whatever it might be to have a fully secure place to park that. Know that I'm always going to have a space. All the levels that technology will be able to manage around that.
Richard, I like the sound of that. Gents, we've come to the end of the session now. Can I just say, Richard, I really look forward to seeing this in action, and I hope your trial goes well. Richard and Clive, thank you both very much for joining us, and I hope to see you again soon on our next vlog. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.